I just bought this 1993 Toyota pickup, and today we're gonna get it back up and running. It's been sitting for at least 10 years. I was told it was parked for a head gasket and or timing chain issue, but of course we're gonna jump into it, do our own diagnostics, and get this thing back on the road. We're just gonna dive straight into this thing. It is a two-wheel drive model. It is 22 RE fuel injected. It's got a pretty darn clean body. There's definitely some signs of previous body work and stuff, but all in all, there's no major damage. The front end looks good, and the only big issue is that I got it without a bed. So the previous owners bought this thing for the bed. They took the bed off, put it on their four-wheel drive. They didn't really want to deal with the rest of it, and that's where I came in. Let's dive in and see what this thing's all about. For starters, the interior is in honestly really good shape. The driver's side door card's great. The passenger side door card's peeling just a little bit, but the seat's got no tears. It's in really good shape. The headliner is also in really good shape. It's got a all original radio. All the climate control is in good shape. The cup holders aren't broken. And it's pretty low miles with only 195,000. And I know that might not be super low miles, but this truck is 30 years old at this point, and I have seen so many of these trucks with 300,000 to 400,000 miles. So seeing one under 200,000 is pretty nice. Now let's pop the hood and see what's going on under the engine bay. Pop in the hood of this thing, and we've got a pretty decent looking engine. You can definitely tell it's been sitting for a while. There's dirt and grime everywhere, but all in all, it's not too terrible. It doesn't look like there have been mice living in here. It doesn't look like it's super beat up. All of the wiring seems to be intact. And these are all really good things, because when trucks are sitting, they can really get beaten up. Mice, rats, squirrels, the weather can all be super hard on these trucks. And I think that's in fact what caused the passenger side door card to start peeling down, is just sitting in the sun for 10 years. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna check the oil. Oh my goodness. They must have just done an oil change on this thing or something, because that oil is extremely clean. And let's see if it's got any coolant in it. Well, that might contribute to the head gasket theory, I was told. The people I bought it from were not 100% sure, but they said that they thought that it got parked either for a timing chain issue or for a head gasket issue. And considering there is nothing in the radiator but a little bit of rust, I would not doubt if there's a head gasket issue. But these things are so easy to work on, that'll be no big deal. In fact, I've got a head gasket sitting on the shelf in the shop, so we should have everything we need to get this thing back up and going. There's a lot of different ways you can go about seeing the health of an engine before you put a battery in it and crank it over, because that can cause issues, but I'm about the down and dirty way. So we've got a battery in there, we're gonna hook it up, we're gonna crank it over and see what it sounds like on the starter. That'll tell us if it's got compression. If it doesn't have compression, there's a good chance there's a timing chain issue, maybe bent valves. If it does sound like it's got compression, then there's also a good chance that maybe there's just a head gasket issue and it overheated and blew the head gasket. So I'm gonna hook that battery up, we're gonna get in it, crank it over, and see what it sounds like. Of course, I got a battery that's backwards because I don't have the proper battery, but we got everything hooked up. So now that there's a battery in it, let's see what this thing sounds like. Oh, well, that's a good sign. It buzzes. Lights come on the dash. Honestly, doesn't sound terrible. Now, I don't think it's necessarily gonna start based on cranking over and hearing absolutely no trying to start. So first thing we're gonna do is see if it's got fuel, spark, and air. And if it's been sitting for 10 years, I've got a real good feeling that the fuel in the fuel tank is nasty, and hopefully the fuel tank isn't just completely full of rust. So we're gonna see if the fuel pump kicks on first thing first. Since there is no bed on this thing, it should be real easy. We can just pop off the screws to the fuel sending unit and see if it's got a decent fuel pump and see what the fuel in the tank looks like. The fuel filler does not look terrible, so that's a good sign. Hopefully that has a little bit of foresight into how the tank looks, because usually if those things are super rusty, the tank is also super rusty. Went ahead and got the 8mm. We're gonna pull the fuel sending unit out and see how everything looks in there. It'll tell us how the pump looks, how the tank looks, and if we need to do anything else to get this thing some fuel to the engine, because without fuel, it's never gonna start. Oh man, this is absolutely disgusting and rough, and that's a lot of rust. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna run into the garage and we're gonna get a drain pan. We're gonna drain all the fuel out of this because I'm sure the fuel in there is rancid if there's that much rust on the pickup. I think I have a spare fuel pump that'll work for this application, and if I do, that would be awesome. That way we don't have to spend $50, $80 on a fuel pump. We can drain this out, clean the tank up a little bit, and then we'll have fuel to the engine. We can see if it fires up, and we can start diagnosing the engine from there. One of the best parts about the fact that I just cleaned up my garage is that I was pretty sure I knew exactly where this was. 88 Toyota 2.4 liter. So we've got a fuel pump here, a whole sending unit. It's got the wrong plug on it for the power wires, but this is a whole sending unit that's got no rust on it and should work for our pickup. So that's awesome. That means we have a pump. This one should work. It's in 1,000 times better shape. So we're gonna grab a drain pan, everything we need to drain the fuel out of it, and get the fuel drained out of that tank so that we can have good fuel, a good fuel pump, and that'll get us fuel to the engine. Oh, gross. That is some of the nastiest fuel I have seen in a long, long time. My hands are discolored from touching it. So this is the very nasty fuel pump that came out of it, and it's got like melted grossness everywhere. So I went ahead and I stuck my hand into the tank and wiped the bottom, and this is what came out. It is a gooey, sticky, gross mixture of disgustingness. Since all that nasty stuff came out of the tank, I went ahead and I poured about a gallon of good fuel into the bottom of the tank to try and break up some of that nasty gunk, because this is the fuel that came out of this. It is as dark as motor oil, absolutely disgusting, and 100% why the fuel pump is locked up and why the engine won't run. Fuel is not supposed to be brown. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna rinse this tank out a couple more times, then wash it out, and hopefully we can get it looking halfway decent so that we can put some good fuel in there and a good fuel pump in there. Start it up. After spending way too long getting this tank cleaned out, we wiped the bottom of the tank with paper towels over and over and over again. Just absolutely disgusting goop coming out of there, and big old chunks of disgusting goop at that. We've got so much. It's just black, and it had like the consistency of honey, and it's hardening into like a hard substance. We wire brushed off the pickup. I was gonna replace it, but with this rust, I was a little nervous that it was going to strip some stuff or seize some stuff. And since everything's hooked up already, I'm just gonna run this. We've got everything cleaned out. We're gonna throw a new sock on the new pump on the old pickup, throw it in the tank, throw some more fuel in the tank. Hopefully we're getting fuel to the engine now. We're gonna put the key in it, turn it over, and see if it fires up. So I guess there ain't much to it but to do it. I'm gonna plug this tank up because we finally have clean fuel coming out of the bottom, because I've been rinsing it and rinsing it. And now when I put fuel in, it comes out fuel colored. Before it was coming out brown. You can see the fuel in that bucket is just brown and disgusting. But after rinsing it with acetone, rinsing it with MEK, and rinsing it with about 5 gallons of gas, we finally got somewhere. So I'm gonna put this together and see where we are. I think we got some good timing because the sky is starting to get angry. We're starting to hear some lightning and thunder. and I just got everything back in. We ended up using a new sending unit. I had to splice the old plug onto it. We've got some gas in there, and I think we're ready to turn the key over and see if it starts. So I'm gonna jump in the truck and we're gonna see. I'm really excited. Hopefully we at least hear the fuel pump priming, because that's something we didn't hear before. If my battery connections weren't crap. Ugh, this battery's not the right battery. So it's a little bit of a pain. Here is the moment of truth. I don't know that the fuel pump's priming. First thing first, let's check these fuses. Which one of these is fuel? It's intact. I wonder if I put a bad fuel pump in this thing. That'd be less than ideal. I'm gonna go get some power and hook up to it manually and see if it's good. So this is a trick I've used in the past. I've got a Milwaukee M18 here. We're gonna feed 18 volts to this fuel pump and see if we can't get something out of it. Sometimes when 12 volts won't get it to turn over, 18 is just enough, gives it a little bit more power and unsticks it where it's at. And this fuel pump's been sitting around for a long time. There's a good chance it's a little bit stuck. Well, it's making noise. So the fuel pump's not locked up. It's making noise. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna guess there's a wiring issue somewhere. Not exactly sure where, but considering that it was trying to start as soon as I hooked power up to the fuel pump and now it's not, I think that we're not getting power to the fuel pump and that's why it's not pumping. On these trucks, the airflow meter is a flap style. So when the flap in there opens, which is really hard to see, it triggers the fuel pump, and I actually hear the relay and the fuel pump kicking on when I have it triggered. So I wonder if it was maybe just a little bit stuck, and we're gonna try this one more time. Okay, interesting. It's like trying to a little bit. We're gonna lower it down, level things out, put a little bit more fuel in the tank and see what we can figure out. Because it sounds like the fuel pump's pumping, so if we're getting fuel and it tries to fire, it means we're getting spark. So I wonder if the airflow meter's having issues or if we've got low compression, because those are both possibilities. So we've got the rest of the fuel that I've gotten here, which is about 2 gallons in the tank, which should be more than enough. And it does not want to start. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna actually jam this screwdriver in the airflow meter to hold it open so that the engine thinks it's getting air and kicks the fuel pump on and see if maybe it's just not getting enough air to move that little flapper. I've got the screwdriver jammed up in there, holding the airflow meter open. We're gonna turn the key on and see if the fuel pump is cycling. As a matter of fact, it is. So now we're gonna turn it over and see with the fuel pump definitely on if it'll start. No. I guess now We need to know if it's getting fuel through the engine or if it's just getting to the engine. That was stupid. That was absolutely stupid. Ugh. The return line is not returning. So I've got a feeling that the fuel filter on the side of the block is clogged up and not letting us get fuel up here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take the line off and see if it's get fuel to the fuel filter. So right now the fuel pump is pumping and the line on the output of the filter is disconnected. It's almost impossible to see in there, but nothing's coming out. So I'm gonna say that this filter is absolutely clogged. I think I've got one on the shelf. It's used, but I've got a filter that we can throw on here and see if we can get fuel to the engine, because it sounds promising. It sounds like it wants to start. I think we're just gonna need to get actual fuel to the fuel rail. I guess maybe we have a bigger issue because this is the inlet to the fuel. So this is before the fuel filter, and the fuel pump is pumping right now and nothing's coming out. So we're gonna have to figure out what's going on there. Maybe these lines are clogged, so I'm gonna disconnect them and hook air up to them or something. I'm not sure exactly yet, but I definitely know that we're not getting fuel. I guess this thing needs like 3 gallons of gas for the pickup to work in this thing. Don't know what's going on there. All I know is I went and got more gas, put more gas in it, and now it's pumping fuel out. So I wonder if I was just not picking up fuel. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna hook up all the lines back to the factory filter so I don't have to pull it outside of the block because it's a pain in the butt. See if we can get this thing to fire up, because if we're doing a head gasket, that fuel filter is gonna be way easier to access with no intake on this thing. I'm just gonna try and get it running as is. So we're gonna throw the fuel system back together, fire it up, hopefully hear it run, and go from there. Got the fuel system back together. So now we're gonna go ahead and see if, just maybe, this thing will fire up. Now that we have enough fuel in there for the fuel pump to actually pick up fuel. Oh. Dumb. I gotta plug the fuel pump in for it to actually fuel pump. All right. Oh, hopefully there's enough battery left in this thing because it sounds like it's about to die. Oh! It's definitely trying. I'm gonna take this screwdriver out of the airflow meter and see if it'll start on its own accord without something propping the fuel system on. While it runs, it doesn't run terrible. It just won't stay running. Well, that's a good start. We're getting something. Let's see, make sure everything's hooked up. Everything's tight. This shouldn't cause any issues. Wonder what's going on. Fires up, but it will not stay running. Is this an O2 sensor model? No O2 sensor. Some of them that have an O2 sensor right here, if it doesn't have the O2 sensor hooked up, won't run. The only thing I can think is maybe it's not getting proper fuel pressure. Well, we're a heck of a lot closer. I think I might try and jump the fuel pump with 18 volts up the pressure and see if that does anything. We jumped 18 volts to the fuel pump. It's running. That almost sounded more promising. Nope. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. So I don't know what's going on, if this pickup isn't working great or something, but there was still no fuel coming out of the fuel return. So I went and got another 2 gallons. This is like close to 5 gallons in this tank because it was about half full and I put a whole nother thing in there. So we're gonna put more fuel in, see if we get fuel coming out of the fuel return, because if we're not getting fuel out of the return, I'm sure that the injectors aren't firing and we're having other issues, and see where we go from there. What's nice about not having a bed is the fuel filler is at whatever angle I want it to be that's easiest for the fuel tank. So hopefully this does it and it just fires up and runs, because I'd like to diagnose engine issues, which are supposed to be, I don't think it's got a broken timing chain, which is one of the things I was told. It sounds way too good and it's firing up. Doesn't sound like the timing's off. So maybe it's got timing chain slap, which does eventually eat through the timing cover and cause coolant and oil to mix. And maybe it's just got a bad head gasket. And that would honestly be best case scenario, because I've got a head gasket inside on the shelf. I also, while I was getting gas, I also went ahead and put the battery on the charger so that it has a little bit more juice. Was I really out of gas that whole time? No way. What? It runs. I guess I'm gonna pick up a couple things and see if it moves under its own power. Oh, it runs. It's running rough, but it runs. Oh, definitely a blown head gasket. Well, we're gonna move it under its own power into the garage to start tearing this engine down. But at least it runs. Honestly, super stoked about that. That probably explains why it's running real rough too. But, oh my God, what a relief. Didn't think I'd ever be excited for something to have a blown head gasket and barely run. Let's see if she moves. Oh my goodness. I probably should have put the hood down, but I'm just so excited that it moves. Oh, goodness. Yes. Yeah, I had to turn it off. It didn't just die on me. I'm honestly so excited. This seat and interior are so nice. It gives me so much excitement to have a truck that's got a nice interior and a decent exterior. I'm kind of sad it doesn't have a bed. Flatbed, maybe? I've got a trashed bed that's not the right color, but I'm thinking maybe a flatbed. I don't know. I guess we got to get it running, get our ducks in order before we start trying to fix the cosmetics, because, wow, it runs. That's a good feeling. I had to move the turbo truck out of the way anyway, and I just figured this would be a good opportunity. Which one would you drive home? Stock 22RE 5-speed? Boosted engine swapped auto. Yeah, the boosted part is really cool. The engine swap part's really cool. This thing needs a manual transmission. I think I'm done with the automatic. It was a good thought. I gave it a good run. 2 different automatics, and they're both kind of garbage. So we're probably gonna be fixing that sooner than later too. Well, it took a little bit of getting some things cleaned up, moved around, and getting the Corolla stuffed over, and all my spare Corolla parts stuffed in front of it. But we finally got all the room we're gonna need to pull the truck in and start doing the head gasket. Because unfortunately, I'm not sure how well it came across on camera, but there was a bit of smoke puffing from the radiator when we got that thing started. Who thinks it'll do a burnout? Oh, we caught second! Yes! There's a wee bit of a tickety-tackety. It doesn't necessarily sound great on this thing. So I don't know if it just needs a valve adjustment or what, but this engine's loud. I wouldn't doubt if it just needs a valve adjustment or something simple like that, but luckily for me, we're gonna be digging into it no matter what, so we're gonna figure out what exactly this thing needs. We got the engine pretty well torn down. We got the whole wiring harness off, the exhaust is connected, the upper intake is off. Pulled the valve cover, and this is such a clean engine. Everything in here looks so good. There's definitely a little bit of a obvious like water and stuff build up in there. It's a little milky, but even like underside of the valve cover, everything is so clean. And that's a really good sign. Tells me that this thing had at least regular oil changes. It doesn't have a bunch of gunk or buildup in there, and gives me some good faith that this thing, once it comes apart, is gonna be pretty darn good on the inside. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna set it to top dead center, pull the distributor out, pull the wires off, and we're gonna pull the head off. We're gonna pull the head off with the lower intake still on there. The main reason for that is I absolutely hate pulling these lower intakes. They're an absolute pain, not my favorite thing to do, so I'm just not gonna do it. I'm gonna leave it on the head, pull it off with the head. Shouldn't be a big deal. It'll just be a little bit more stuff on the head when we pull it out. We'll get everything cleaned up, find out how flat the head surface is. As long as the head surface isn't super warped, got a head gasket over there, we'll throw this thing back together and it'll be running a ton better. There was absolutely zero coolant that came out of it. I'm not sure if you can see this drain pan I put under the radiator. It's empty, and that's because there was no coolant in the engine. Radiator was completely drained, but I've got a feeling the previous owner did that when they saw it was mixing coolant and water. I don't know for sure. I don't know the history on this truck, but I do know that it ran well enough for me to justify putting this work into it, and we're almost to the point of getting the head off and inspecting the cylinder walls, the pistons, and the head itself. All right, we got the engine apart, we got everything starting to clean up, and one of the things that I didn't notice when I was pulling the head off until I had it completely off is every single one of these cam lobes, all 8 of them, have pretty severe damage. They're all flat, all of them are destroyed. And if you jump over to the rockers here, a lot harder to see on the rocker, but there is also a real rough spot and worn down spot on all the oh yeah, that one's a lot worse. You can see that one on camera for sure. So unfortunately, that's all destroyed. And I was sitting here wondering how it was so clean with so much damage, and I started looking as I was cleaning up the block, All of these pistons are stamped with 0.50 because this engine was rebuilt, bored over 1/2 mil, and it's got bigger pistons and rings in it. They also used a cheap head gasket, and who knows how long it was in here. And with all of the cam lobes being flat, I've got a good feeling that they bought a reman engine and did not follow the break-in procedure and proceeded to then destroy the cam and rockers. The underside of the head looks okay. I cleaned it up real good. None of the valves are burnt. There's no crazy damage there. That's all just for me trying to scrape the buildup off of it to make sure there's no issues. Doesn't look terrible. It looks like something might have gone through cylinder 1. There's a little bit of damage on it, and there's a little bit of damage on the piston. But there's no major damage, and everything seems to be there. So I went out to my parts pile since the cam is destroyed, and I had a cam sitting in a pile. Unfortunately, it was outside, so there's just a little bit of surface rust on some of the lobes, but that's not terrible. And I've got all of these rockers. So these rockers are in good shape. There's a bit of surface rust on the pedestals, but I was just going to take this apart and throw these rockers on these shafts and pedestals because the shaft doesn't seem like it's got any major damage. If you pull everything over, there's no wear marks on the shaft for the rockers. So we're going to be using these rockers, clean them up a little bit, but they're not all destroyed. And this cam, which came with those rockers, throwing it all back in that head, putting the gasket back on and putting it back together. I think that should be good. Unfortunately, this is the kind of thing that happens when you buy cars secondhand. You can run into some major issues, but I'm really not stoked with how destroyed these are. I genuinely think what happened is that the cam was not broken in properly and also probably had too tight a valve lash, so there wasn't enough movement in there and it was always rubbing. But I don't know for sure. So all I can do is throw good parts in it. This cam has no flat spots, no big issues. This cam does need cleaned up. Like I said, there's a little bit of surface rust. I've got a brass brush that I'm going to be trying to use to clean it up just to get the rust off of there. It's just surface rust. I went ahead and just to be sure that I wasn't going to be scratching the cam lobes, I tried real hard to score these ones up because this cam is destroyed, and it doesn't scratch the cam lobe at all because the brush is soft metal. The cam is hardened steel, so we should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clean up these rockers, clean up this camshaft, put it all in this head, and then this head should be good to go back on. That explains why everything's so clean. They got a reman engine, everything was real clean, and they just did not take care of it. The timing chain guides are intact, the timing set looked new, everything looked real good. It's just not real good. So, is what it is. All right, we've got everything back together. This rocker assembly's back together. Everything's looking good. We've got the cam cleaned up, set aside. We've got the head surface cleaned up and a head gasket set on the block. We've got the head itself cleaned up, ready to go back on. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna set the head back on, get everything put back together. We gotta replace the cam when we set it in there, put the rocker assembly and head bolts back in it, and we should be putting this thing together. After the head's on, it shouldn't take too much time. I left the lower intake on to save a bunch of time and need an exhaust gasket. I have one of these gaskets. So just a few gaskets, throw the thing back together. We should hear this thing firing up in no time.
This is lit.
Got the engine completely back together. I think the time lapse died right before I got the intake tube on, the radiator in, and the battery on. But everything's in, everything's together. And we should be ready for a fire up. On ahead, I filled it with coolant, made sure it's got oil in it. Should be good to go. So we're now going to go ahead, jump in it, and see if she fires up. And hopefully, run is just a little bit better than before, especially considering the cam was flat and the head gasket was blown. This engine was pretty rough. Take two. That sounded a little weird. I wonder if the distributor's a tooth off. I'm gonna try and wiggle the distributor. Let's see, all the way one way. Let's see if it does anything. Better. Oh, the engine's so much quieter. Woo! The distributor just zapped me. My leg was against this, so it went all the way through my leg. And B, I think we're a tooth off because it only runs completely and totally, would that be advanced? I forget, I think that's advanced. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna pull the distributor out, and we're gonna adjust it by one tooth. One tooth adjusted on the distributor, moved it just a little bit. So now hopefully it should fire up a little bit easier. I think what was happening is it was sparking too early, and that's why it had that weird dead spot. It was like, I definitely say that was part of our issue. We want to vary the RPM of the engine a little bit. That way the cam can break into the rockers. I think that's part of why the previous cam went flat, was because it didn't have proper braking. Now that we got this thing running, we're gonna go ahead, back it out of the garage and fix the last couple little things we need. And I also need to decide what I'm gonna do for a bed, because no bed is not ideal. I'm not sure if we're gonna do a flat bed. There's a pretty beat up bed I got with it that's red, so it's definitely not the right color. There's a closer in color bed for sale on Marketplace. It's also pretty darn beat up. But we definitely need to do something, because as it sits, it's ugly and there's no bed, so it's not really a truck. It's more of a two-passenger car. But regardless, we're gonna get this thing pulled out. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to start getting this door panel fixed up. So I'm going to go get some spray adhesive, and we're going to see if we can get it back up where it needs to go and looking a little bit better, because that just is ugly, and that's honestly the worst part of the interior. All the plastic's good, the driver's side door panel's good, the headliner's good. So if we can get that fixed up, this interior would be great, and then we just got to worry about how we're going to get a bed and some taillights on this thing. All right, so unfortunately the camera was not recording, and then I had some audio issues, had a lot of technical difficulties, but remember how I said that this came with a bed? Well, they bought this truck for a bed, and they used it to replace this. So this bed got smashed up real good. As you can see, it's creased all the way along the back, and this fender well is, well, destroyed. So I went ahead and I just threw it on to try and make the truck look a little bit less naked. And man, I didn't expect it to look so good. So it really brought the truck together. It's mismatched color, it's scratched up, it's dinged up, it's dented up. It's far, far from perfect. But just having a bed on it makes it look like a truck again, and not, like I said, a two-door sedan. So really stoked with how this thing's coming together. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna do with it. I've got too many cars, as you can tell. I've got way too many cars, and I don't really need another project truck. Now it runs and drives pretty good, So I'm probably gonna let it go on to a new owner that's gonna love it more. But I really do enjoy getting trucks running and driving again, getting things back on the road. It's a really satisfying feeling. And it's awesome to know that this thing is now a turnkey truck. Can jump in it. I've got the key in my pocket. It starts up, it fires up, it drives, it runs good. And well, all it took was a couple days work. And with the bed on it, it's far from ideal, but it still looks so much better. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I learned from the turbo truck that Tacoma taillights work for this thing because it has no taillights or tailgate. And I know these will plug into the factory wiring harness, and that'll at least give me taillights, turn signals, and brake lights so that it can move around. So I'm gonna figure a way to mock these Tacoma taillights up into this bed. And just a little bit later, you can see it looks a ton better. Yeah, they definitely don't fit right, but they work. And that's really important when you wanna have legal lights and be able to go down the road without getting hassled and also not getting rear-ended again. I think it's time to decide what I'm gonna do with it. But for now, I think that's all this thing's wrote. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and hope to see you on the next one.